Married to the Mafia King Part 3. Chapter 19. The letter. The envelope arrived without ceremony. No courier in an expensive suit, no discreet delivery from one of Max's people. Just a plain ivory envelope slipped under the penthouse door sometime between breakfast and lunch. Elise noticed it when she was returning from the terrace, the faint scratch of paper against the marble floor catching her eye. Her name wasn't written on it. There was no return address. Only the weight, heavier than a greeting card but lighter than a legal packet, suggested that whatever it contained was important. She picked it up and turned it over. The flap was sealed with a plain strip of tape, not wax. Her fingers hesitated on the edge. Instinct told her to open it immediately. Prudence told her to wait. Max was in the study on a call, his deep, even voice drifting faintly through the glass doors. She carried the envelope into her suite and shut the door behind her before tearing it open. Inside was a single manila folder and a note, handwritten in sharp, precise letters. "You deserve to know the truth." Her pulse quickened. She set the note aside and opened the folder. The first page stopped her cold, a series of scanned documents bearing her father's signature, along with signatures from 3 other men she didn't recognize. The letterhead belonged to a shell company she'd never heard of, but the transaction records beneath told a story she understood all too well, a complex funneling of money from one account to another, masked as consulting fees and expedited permits. The second page was worse. It was an email printout, dated months before her father's first conversation with her about Maximum. In it, Michael De Vries discussed leveraging the Conti name to give legitimacy to a deal he knew would collapse, and profiting before the failure was public. Her hands trembled as she turned the final page. It was a photograph, grainy but clear enough to identify the people in it, her father, shaking hands with one of the men from the signatures, standing in front of a villa she vaguely remembered from childhood. Written in pen beneath the image were 5 words. "He sold the lie to you." Elise sat back, the weight of the folder pressing into her lap. She'd told herself for weeks that her doubts about her father were temporary, that the inconsistencies were nothing more than misunderstandings. But here it was, in black and white, not only proof that her father had orchestrated the scam, but that he had deliberately used Max's name to protect himself. And then there was the worst truth of all, she had married Maximiliano Conti with revenge in her heart, for a crime he had never committed. Her first instinct was to confront Max immediately, to throw herself at his feet and confess everything. But the idea of walking into his study now, with this file in her hand and shame burning in her chest, was too much. Instead, she slid the folder into the back of her wardrobe, hidden behind a row of gowns she hadn't worn yet. She needed time to think. But as she stood there in the quiet of her suite, the hum of the city far below, she realized there was no more denying it, her loyalties had been built on a lie. And sooner or later, she was going to have to tell Max the truth. Chapter 20. Shattered Illusions. Elise didn't plan the confrontation. It was one of those decisions that seemed to happen all at once, a spark igniting into an unstoppable fire. The anonymous folder had been burning a hole in her wardrobe for 2 days. She'd barely slept, lying awake in the dark while every memory of her father's warnings replayed in her mind. The Spanish deal. The whispered stories. The insistent way he'd looked her in the eye and told her Maximiliano Conti ruined us. Now she knew. He hadn't been warning her. He'd been manipulating her. So when Max left for a late meeting at the port, she booked the first flight to Amsterdam. The city was grey and damp when she arrived, the canal slick with rain and the air carrying that sharp, metallic scent that comes before more weather. Her father's townhouse was the same as she remembered, narrow, elegant, a little too proud for its modest footprint. Michael De Vries opened the door wearing a cashmere sweater and a smile that faltered the instant he saw her expression. "Elise. This is unexpected." "I'm sure it is," she said, stepping past him without waiting for an invitation. The warmth of the foyer did nothing to thaw the cold, tight knot in her chest. "We need to talk." He closed the door slowly. "Is this about your husband?" She turned on him, the words sharp as glass. "It's about you." He blinked, the mild surprise on his face a little too measured. "What do you mean?" "I mean I know," she said, pulling the folder from her bag and tossing it onto the console table. "I know you were behind the deal. The fake permits. The shell companies. And I know you used Max's name to make it look legitimate." For a moment, he didn't move. Then he sighed, the sound of a man finally realizing there's no more point in pretending. "I did what I had to do," he said quietly. "You lied to me." Her voice cracked on the last word. "I protected you," he countered, as if the distinction mattered. "You think I wanted to involve you? You think I wanted my daughter married off like some pawn?" "That's exactly what you did," she snapped, her hands curling into fists. "You told me he trapped you, that he ruined you, and you made me believe it, so I'd, what? Go into this marriage ready to destroy him." Michael's jaw tightened. "I knew you wouldn't agree if I told you the truth. And I didn't have time to explain. If I hadn't made the deal, I'd have lost everything. And worse, there were people I owed who wouldn't have been as merciful as Maximum." Elise stared at him, trying to reconcile the man she'd trusted all her life with the one standing in front of her now. "So you sold me to save yourself?" "I gave you to a man who could protect you," he corrected, his tone almost defensive. "Whatever else you think of him, you're safer with Maximiliano Conti than you'd ever be with me." The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock in the hall. She stepped back, her hands trembling. "You didn't protect me. You used me. And you made me believe the one man who's actually treated me with respect was my enemy." His expression softened for a moment, maybe guilt, maybe just resignation. "You'll thank me someday." But Elise knew that day would never come. She left without another word, the cold Amsterdam air hitting her like a slap as she stepped back into the street. By the time she reached the airport, she'd made her decision. The next conversation she had about this wouldn't be with her father. It would be with Maximum. Chapter 21: The Tears and the Truth. The flight back to Monaco felt endless. Elise sat by the window, the hum of the engines a dull backdrop to the storm inside her head. She kept replaying her father's confession, his voice low and unapologetic as he admitted to everything: the scam, the forged documents, the deliberate use of Max's name. The weight of it sat heavy on her chest, mingled with something even harder to carry, shame. She had walked into her marriage with a mission. She had smiled in Max's face while plotting his downfall. And yet, he had never once treated her with the kind of coldness her father had claimed to expect from him. Instead, he'd offered her patience, protection, even moments of gentleness she hadn't known how to accept. By the time the car brought her from the airport to the penthouse, night had settled over Monaco, the city glittering like spilled jewels below. Max's voice carried faintly from the living room when she entered. He was on the phone, speaking in that deep, calm tone she'd come to recognize as his business voice. When he saw her, his words trailed off mid-sentence. Elise. There was something unreadable in his gaze, surprise, concern, maybe even relief. I didn't know you were leaving town. I know, she said quietly, her throat tight. I need to talk to you. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in that way he had when bracing for something important. All right. He gestured to the sofa. Sit. She shook her head. No. I need to stand. He stayed where he was, hands in his pockets, watching her. Waiting. She took a breath so deep it almost hurt. When I married you, it wasn't because I wanted to. My father told me you'd framed him, ruined him. He said you forced the marriage to save yourself from legal trouble. He told me, her voice faltered, shame rising like heat in her cheeks. He told me I needed to get close to you, gain your trust, and eventually make you regret everything you'd done. Max's face didn't change. No flicker of outrage, no mocking smile. He just stood there, utterly still. And I believed him, she continued, the words tumbling out now. Every smile, every dinner, every moment between us, I told myself it was all part of the plan. Even when you made me feel things I didn't want to feel, I held on to that story. She swallowed hard, her hands curling into fists at her sides. But I was wrong. I found proof. Documents, emails, photographs. My father set you up. He used your name to make his scam look legitimate. You never hurt him. He hurt you. And me. The silence stretched. She could hear the faint ticking of the antique clock in the corner, the distant hum of traffic below. Finally, Max spoke. His voice was low, steady. How long have you known? 2 days, she whispered. And you came back. I had to, she said, her voice breaking. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped wanting to hurt you. I started, she closed her eyes, forcing the word past her lips. I started loving you. The confession hung in the air, fragile and terrifying. When she opened her eyes again, Max was no longer standing by the sofa. He was right in front of her, so close she could see the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. I knew, he said quietly. Her breath caught. You, what? I knew what your father told you. I knew why you kept your distance. I thought if I gave you enough time, you'd see the truth for yourself. He reached up, his hand cupping her cheek. And you did. Her throat tightened, tears blurring her vision. I'm sorry, Maximum. I'm so sorry. He brushed away the first tear with his thumb. No more apologies. Not tonight. And then, for the first time since their wedding day, she kissed him with nothing between them, no pretense, no calculation, no walls. Just truth. Chapter 22 Lovers in Monaco. The night air drifted in through the open balcony doors, carrying with it the faint scent of the sea. The city of Monaco spread below them like a glittering necklace, each light shimmering against the velvet dark. Elise and Max sat side by side on the low couch in the living room, a half-empty bottle of Barolo between them. Her confession still lingered in the air, raw and fragile, but no longer a weight pressing on her chest. For the first time since their wedding day, she wasn't guarding her words. Max was leaning back, one arm draped casually along the back of the couch, his gaze fixed on her with that unreadable intensity that had both unnerved and intrigued her from the start. You really knew, she asked finally, breaking the quiet. I did. His voice was calm, almost conversational. From the first week. Her stomach tightened. How? You were polite, he said, but there was a wall. You smiled, but your eyes didn't match. And when you thought I wasn't looking, you were watching me like you were memorizing every move I made. He sipped his wine, his eyes never leaving hers. You didn't marry me to be my wife, Elise. You married me to be my spy. She winced at the truth of it. And you just let me. Max set the glass down on the table between them, leaning forward slightly. If I'd confronted you then, you wouldn't have believed me. You needed to find the truth for yourself. Anything else would have just been my word against your father's. It was infuriating, and yet she couldn't deny he was right. If he had tried to convince her, she would have thought it was a calculated move to protect himself. She would have clung harder to her father's version of events. So you just waited, she asked, her voice soft. I'm a patient man. His lips curved faintly, but his eyes were serious. And I knew the moment would come when you'd have to choose. Between him and me. She swallowed, feeling the weight of that choice even now. And you weren't afraid I'd choose him. I was afraid, Max admitted. But I also knew something about you your father never understood. You value truth more than loyalty. Even if it hurts. The words struck deep, both a compliment and a quiet acknowledgement of how far she'd come. He shifted closer, his hand finding hers. Now that you know, there's no point in looking back. I don't want a wife who's pretending. I want a partner. Someone who's at my side because she chooses to be. Her pulse quickened. And you think that's me? I know it is. They sat in silence for a moment, the distant hum of the city the only sound between them. Then Elise leaned in, resting her forehead against his. I choose you, Maximum. It was a vow, unadorned but absolute. He kissed her then, slow, deliberate, a seal on the new truth between them. There was no heat born of defiance this time, no tension of hidden agendas. Just connection. When they finally broke apart, he smiled faintly. Good. Because I have plans, and they'll be better with you in them. Plans? She asked, curious. You'll see, he said, his voice dropping into that teasing note she'd grown to recognize. But this time, you won't have to guess whose side you're on. That night, they didn't retreat to separate suites. They stayed together, the balcony doors open to the sea breeze, and Elise let herself believe that for the first time in this marriage, she wasn't living in a game, she was living in the beginning of something real. Chapter 23 The Grand Gesture. It began, as grand gestures often do, with a whisper. A small, ugly rumor had started weaving its way through the upper echelons of European society, that Michael De Vries was once again entangled in questionable dealings, this time in connection with a failed art investment. Elise heard it first at a luncheon with the wives of several hotel magnates. The smiles were sweet, but the questions were laced with venom. I heard your father might be in trouble again, dear. Is that true? She kept her composure, sipping her tea as if the comment hadn't landed like a slap. But inside, her stomach twisted. The last thing she wanted, the last thing she needed, was for her father's name to be dragged through another scandal, especially after everything that had already happened. That evening, she told Max about it. He listened without interrupting, his eyes narrowing slightly as she recounted the details. I don't care what my father's done in the past, she said quietly. But I won't watch him be humiliated again. Not over something he didn't do. Max leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Leave it to me. The way he said it made her pulse quicken. She had learned enough about her husband to know that when Maximiliano Conti promised something, it was as good as done. 2 nights later, they attended a charity gala at the Hotel Hermitage, the kind of event where the right word spoken in the right ear could shift the current of an entire industry. Elise was radiant in a pale gold gown, her hair swept into a loose chignon, the Conti heirloom necklace resting like a crown at her throat. Max, in a perfectly tailored midnight tuxedo, looked every inch the man whose presence commanded both deference and curiosity. The evening was already buzzing with talk. The rumored art scandal had clearly followed them into the room. Max seemed entirely unbothered, moving from one small group to another with his usual unshakable poise. Elise stayed close, though she felt the sting of curious eyes tracking her every move. It was during the live auction interlude that Max made his move. The host, a distinguished French businessman with salt and pepper hair, was about to introduce the next item when Max smoothly took the microphone from him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying effortless over the crowd, "before we continue, I'd like to make a brief statement." The room hushed instantly. "There have been unfortunate rumors circulating about a man I hold in high regard. Michael De Vries is a respected businessman and a valued member of my family. Any suggestion that he is involved in fraudulent art investments is not only false, it is an insult to those who know him." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Max didn't flinch. "I have personally reviewed the transactions in question," he continued, his gaze sweeping the room, "and can confirm that Mr. De Vries was not only uninvolved, but he declined to participate in the project precisely because it lacked transparency. I suggest," he added, his tone cooling just enough to make the point, "that anyone repeating this rumor consider the consequences of defaming an innocent man." The silence that followed was heavy, not uncomfortable, but decisive. Then came the applause. It started with a few polite claps, then grew until the entire ballroom was echoing with the sound. Elise stood frozen beside him, her heart pounding, her eyes burning with the sudden threat of tears. When he handed the microphone back and returned to her side, he simply offered his arm. "Shall we?" As they moved through the rest of the evening, she could feel the shift in the air. Conversations brightened when they approached. The sharp glances that had greeted her earlier were gone, replaced with warmth, or, at the very least, calculated respect. Later, as their car wound its way up the hill to the penthouse, Elise finally spoke. "You didn't have to do that." Max glanced at her, his expression softening. "Yes, I did. Not because of him, because of you." And in that moment, she realized something that tightened her throat. Max wasn't just protecting her from enemies. He was protecting the people she loved, even the ones who didn't deserve it. Chapter 24: The Proposal 2.0. The trip was a surprise. Max told her only to pack for warm weather and something worth remembering. The jet carried them south, away from the winter-tinged Mediterranean, and when they landed on the island of Santorini, the air was so soft and warm it felt like it belonged to another world entirely. A black car swept them from the airport straight to the marina, where a yacht waited, not just large, but architectural, with sweeping lines of glass and chrome that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. Its name, Eterna, gleamed in gold on the stern. Elise caught her breath. "Is this a business trip?" she asked as they boarded. Max's smile was faint, secretive. "Something like that." The crew welcomed them with champagne and chilled towels scented faintly with lemon blossom. Within minutes, the yacht was cutting through the Aegean, leaving the curve of the island behind as they sailed toward open water. The day unfolded in quiet luxury, a late lunch of grilled sea bass and fresh figs on the sun deck, a lazy swim in a hidden cove where the water was so clear she could see the ripples on the sand below, and hours stretched out in the warmth of the sun. Elise found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't realized she needed. No scheming, no guarded glances, no lingering shadows from the past. Just them. It was sunset when Max told her to change into something formal. She laughed. "We're in the middle of the sea." He only replied, "Trust me." She emerged 20 minutes later in a silk dress the color of champagne, her hair swept into loose waves by the sea breeze. The deck had been transformed while she was below, a white linen-draped table for two, lanterns casting golden light across the teak, and, beyond the railing, the caldera of Santorini glowing in the last blush of daylight. The water mirrored the sky in deep rose and gold. They dined slowly, the kind of meal meant to linger, lobster with saffron risotto, delicate pastries filled with honey and pistachio. Elise felt the air shift with every course, as if something unspoken was drawing nearer. When dessert was cleared away, Max rose from his chair. "Come with me." He led her to the bow of the yacht, where a single lantern hung from the railing, its light pooling softly at their feet. Above them, the first stars had begun to prick the velvet sky. Fireworks suddenly bloomed from a nearby barge, exploding in bursts of gold and silver that lit the sea like molten glass. Elise turned toward him, startled, and found him holding a small black velvet box. Her breath caught. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low enough to be heard only over the gentle rush of the waves. "When we got married, it wasn't because we chose each other. It was a bargain. A transaction. But somewhere along the way, that changed. I don't want our story to start with debt and suspicion. I want it to start here." He opened the box. Inside, nestled against black satin, was a diamond ring so clear it caught the fireworks and shattered them into rainbows. "Elise," he continued, "will you marry me again? This time because you want to. Because we love each other. Because we choose it." The emotion rose so sharply in her chest it almost hurt. For weeks she had lived between two worlds, loyalty to her father and the growing pull toward the man she had vowed to bring down. Now, there was no question. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. 1,000 times yes. Max slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand warm around hers. The fireworks reached their peak, the golden light washing over them as he kissed her, deep and certain, a seal on the promise they were remaking together. Somewhere behind them, the crew cheered quietly, and the Eterna sailed on through the sparkling night, carrying them into the future they had finally chosen. Chapter 25: The Wedding of the Century. The sky over Lake Como was the pale, luminous blue of a Botticelli painting, the kind of sky that seemed hand-picked for a wedding. The air carried the scent of jasmine from the villa's terraced gardens, mingled with the faintest trace of champagne already being poured somewhere nearby. Villa Aurelia, a sprawling 18th-century estate with ivory walls and cascading bougainvillea, had been transformed into a cathedral of opulence. Silk drapes billowed gently in the breeze, crystal chandeliers hung from temporary structures on the lawn, and every path was lined with white roses and flickering candles. The lake beyond shimmered like a mirror, dotted with gondolas inlaid with gold leaf, waiting to carry guests to and from the celebration. This was not just a wedding. It was a coronation. Elise stood in one of the villa's high-ceilinged salons, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, her reflection framed in a gilt-edged mirror. Her gown was a vision, layers of hand-embroidered lace and silk, with a sweeping train that caught the light as if it had been dusted with stars. The Conti heirloom necklace rested against her collarbone, its diamonds glittering with every breath. The room was still except for the soft rustle of fabric as her veil was settled into place. For a moment, she closed her eyes, remembering the first wedding, the weight of duty, the quiet anger curled tight inside her. Today was nothing like that. Today, there was no deception, no hidden agenda. Only choice. When the music began, she stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the gardens. Below, rows of guests turned toward her, European royalty, titans of industry, old friends from Paris and Monaco, and a scattering of Hollywood faces that had made the gossip columns buzz for weeks. Cameras clicked, champagne glasses stilled midair. Max waited at the altar, a marble platform adorned with roses and crystal, dressed in a perfectly tailored white tuxedo jacket, black trousers, and a bow tie. He didn't glance at the crowd, didn't acknowledge the murmurs of admiration. His eyes were on her alone. As she descended the grand staircase, the lace of her train trailing behind her, Elise felt the strange, heady calm of a woman who knows exactly where she belongs. Each step was accompanied by the gentle chime of crystal flutes as the orchestra played a sweeping arrangement of strings that seemed to float on the summer air. When she reached him, Max took her hand, warm, steady, and the world narrowed to the space between them. The officiant's voice rose over the hush of the crowd, speaking of love chosen freely, of trust rebuilt, of the strength found in partnership. Max repeated his vows in a voice that carried, rich and certain. I take you again, Elise, not as part of a bargain, but because you are my equal, my partner, and my love. From this day forward, in every moment, you are my choice. Her own vows trembled only slightly on her lips. Max, I married you once without knowing who you truly were. I marry you now knowing all of you, and loving you not despite the truth, but because of it. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife for the second time, Max didn't hesitate. He drew her close and kissed her under the arch of white roses, the crowd erupting into applause, camera flashes catching the way her veil lifted in the warm breeze. The celebration unfolded across the villa's gardens and terraces. Long banquet tables glittered under chandeliers strung between olive trees, laden with silver candelabras, crystal, and dishes of truffle pasta, fresh lobster, and tid pastries. Waiters in white gloves moved silently through the throng, refilling flutes of vintage Dom Perignon. After the first dance, a slow, intimate waltz that drew cheers from the guests, Max led her down to the private dock. A gondola waited, its polished wood gleaming under the moonlight, upholstered in cream silk and strewn with rose petals. As they drifted across the lake, the fireworks began, golden blooms that lit the water and turned the ripples into rivers of light. Elise leaned into him, her head against his shoulder, and for the first time since the day they met, there was no trace of doubt in her. She had come into this marriage as collateral. She was leaving this night as the woman who had chosen, and been chosen in return. The lake, the villa, the music, the stars, it all seemed to exist for this single truth. Their story, once built on lies, now belonged entirely to them. That's the end of this story, but trust me, the next one is even more thrilling. We drop fresh episodes every day, so don't miss out. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned, you won't want to miss what's coming next.
Because every broken heart deserves a comeback. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe for more emotional romance every week. Hit like, drop a comment, and ring the bell so you never miss a moment of romance, redemption, and powerful love. And don't keep the drama to yourself, share this story with someone who lives for twists just like you. Thanks for listening, and remember, sometimes the best comeback is becoming unforgettable.